Okay, so this video is going to be about adding and subtracting fractions. By the end of the video, the lesson objective is this. I can add and subtract fractions, and we're also going to throw in some mixed numbers. This lesson is review. You've been doing this since 5th or 6th grade, and so I'm going to go pretty quickly and do just a couple of examples. We'll do more in class tomorrow. The first thing we need to do is vocabulary. There's a lot of vocabulary in this lesson, and the first thing we need to start with is the parts of a fraction. Okay, so a fraction is a number that shows a part of a whole. So when you eat 2 pieces out of 8 of pizza, that's a part of the whole, okay, and that's a fraction. Pieces of the fraction are this. The numerator is the top number of the fraction. And it's the part. So like in my example for pizza, it's the two pieces that you ate out of all of it, okay? The denominator is the bottom number of the fraction. And it represents the whole, or how many total pieces there are in my example. Now we're going to talk about fractions and how they are alike and different, okay, and how you can make them alike. Equivalent fractions are fractions that don't look alike, but they are equal. So they're fractions that are equal. For instance, if you eat 1/2 of a pizza, you can also eat 3 pieces out of 6, and that's the same amount of pizza, okay? And to give you another example, a bigger example, if you cut a pizza up into 48 pieces and you ate 24 of those 48, that is also equivalent, okay? You're going to use equivalent fractions when you simplify and reduce or expand. You're going to hear us say often when you get an answer, is that in simplest form? What that means is to make it smaller by using equivalent fractions. And the way you do that is to divide. So if I have 12/30ths, okay, that's not in simplest form because I can divide both the numerator and the denominator by a number. Now, if I know that both of these can be divided by a large number like 6, I can go ahead and do that right away. So 12 divided by 6 is 2, and 30 divided by 6 is 5. As long as I do the same thing to the top and the bottom, that gives me an equivalent fraction. Let's say you didn't know that they could both be divided by 6. You can start smaller as long as you continue to get it to the simplest form. So let's say I know that 12 and 30 are even numbers, so I start with 2. And I divide by 2. 12 divided by 2 is 6. 30 divided by 2 is 15. When I look at that, I know it's not in simplest form, and they can both be divided by 3. So I can do it again to get it in simplest form and divide it by 3. 6 divided by 3 is 2. 15 divided by 3 is 5. And I end up with the exact same answer. It just took me a little longer to get there. Okay? The other type of equivalent fraction is when you expand a fraction. You're going to use that in this lesson to find common denominators, okay? And when you add and subtract, you have to have common denominators. To expand, you're making a fraction larger by doing the same thing to the numerator and the denominator. So for instance, 2/3. If I want to make it have a denominator of 9, the way I find the numerator, the equivalent fraction, is I multiplied 3 times 3 to get 9, so I do this, multiply, not divide, hello. So I do the same thing to the top, 2 times 3 is 6, and you'll need that when you're finding common denominators. Okay, 2 more vocabulary words. Let's talk about types of fractions, okay? Proper fractions are when the numerator is smaller than the denominator. So, 3/5 is proper. 6/9 is proper. Not in simplest form, but it's proper. Okay? Improper is when you have a numerator on the top that is larger than the denominator. So for instance, 15/8. That's improper, and that can be changed to a mixed number. The way I do that is I divide the numerator by the denominator, and I see how many are left over. So let me do that on the side here. 15 divided by 8, okay? 8 goes into 15 one time. So I know that's my whole number for my mixed. Okay? And then I subtract. 15 take away 8 is 7. This number right here turns into my numerator of my fraction. So 15/8 is the same thing as 1 and 7/8. And when you have an improper fraction for an answer, I need you to change that into a mixed number. That's simplest form. Okay, so let's get into the nitty-gritty of adding and subtracting fractions with unlike denominators. If they have unlike denominators, the first thing you're going to do is find a common denominator. Adding and subtracting fractions, just like adding and subtracting integers, is a little bit more complicated than multiplying and dividing, but you should be able to do that by now. So this really should be a review. So we're going to go through the steps and we're going to solve this addition and subtraction problem. And I want you to pause for each step and try and do it by yourself and then come back and see how you did. Okay? So let's look at 13/18 plus 2/9. We're going to do the first thing. We're going to find a common denominator. Well, they don't have a common denominator, so I have to find one. Pause the video and try and find the common denominator and equivalent fraction by yourself. Okay, so let's try this. What I know is that 9 goes into 18 evenly, so I can use 18 as my common denominator. So I'm not going to do anything to this fraction. It's going to stay 13/18. Okay? Oh, Lordy. Sorry, guys. Okay, but I do have to change 2/9. Well, 9 times 2 is 18. Whatever I do to the bottom, I have to do to the top. So 2 times 2 is 4. That's my first step. I created my equivalent, or my second step, sorry, I created my equivalent fractions. My third step says to add or subtract the numerators. 13 plus 4 is 17. And then I keep the denominator, so my denominator is 18. Now I'm going to look at it and see if I need to reduce or simplify. I know that 17/18 is in simplest form, so I do not have to reduce or simplify. All right, so let's go to the subtraction problem. 6/7 minus 3/4. Go ahead and they do not have a common denominator, so go ahead and find the common denominator and create equivalent fractions. Pause the video to do that and then come back and see how you did. Okay, so finding the common denominator is not as simple for this one. One of my denominators does not divide into the other one evenly, so I'm going to look at those, and my easiest way to find a common denominator is to multiply those two numbers together. Okay, so I'm going to multiply those together and I get 28. So now I have to find my numerators or my equivalent fractions. Well, 7 times 4 gives me 28, so I have to do that to the top also. 6 times 4 is 24. Let's do 3/4. 4 times 7 is 28, and 3 times 7 is 21. So now I have my equivalent fractions. I've done that. Now I'm going to add or subtract the numerators. Well, it says subtract, so 24 take away 21 is 3. That's step 3. Step 4 is keep the denominator. I will do that, so 28. And step 5 is to see if it needs to be simplified. Well, I know that 3 is a prime number, and it can't go evenly into 28, so 3/28 is in simplest form. Make sure you write down any questions about adding and subtracting plain fractions before tomorrow so that we can answer any questions you might have. Flip to the next slide. All right, so now we're going to talk about adding and subtracting mixed numbers. Adding and subtracting mixed numbers are just about the same. You only add one more step, which is to add or subtract the whole numbers, okay? And you have to see if you need to borrow when you're subtracting, all right? So when you're adding and subtracting mixed numbers, you absolutely can leave them as mixed numbers. Multiplying and dividing is different, okay? So let's go through our steps, and again, pause the video and do each step by yourself and then come back and see how you did. My first one is find a common denominator if it's necessary. Well, 5 and 15 are not the same, so I have to find a common denominator. So I want you to pause the video, find your common denominator, and create equivalent fractions. Okay, let's see how you did. So 5 and 15. I know 5 goes into 15 evenly, so my common denominator is going to be 15. So I'm going to scooch over my whole numbers first. Or my whole number first, sorry, and I'm going to make 15 as my denominator. 5 times 3 is 15, so I have to do the same thing to the top. 2 times 3 is 6. Now I don't have to do anything to 2 and 4/15 because it's already got 15 as the denominator. Okay? All right, let's go on. So now I have my equivalent fractions. We're going to add or subtract the whole numbers. It's adding. So 9 plus 2 is 11. Now I'm going to add or subtract my numerators. 6 plus 4 is 10 over 15. Keep my denominator. When I look, then my last step is reduce or simplify if necessary. I know that 10 and 15 can be divided by 5, so I'm going to divide them by 5. And I keep my whole number the same, so it's 11. 10 divided by 5 is 2. 15 divided by 5 is 3. So my final answer in simplest form is 11 2/3. One more problem, and I know the video is getting long, but that's what happens with fractions, so we're going to get through it as quickly as possible. This one is the same, adding and subtracting mixed numbers. This one is subtracting. Let's go through the steps. You try it, come back and see how you did. All right, so this one takes a few more steps, so I'm going to try and make it a little smaller. Here we go. 4 and 5 are not common denominators, so I'm going to multiply them together to find my common denominator. 20 is my common denominator, so I'm going to scooch over my whole numbers and write in my denominator so I don't forget what they are. Okay, now I'm going to find my equivalent fractions. 4 times 5 is 20, so I have to do 3 times 5, which is 15. 5 times 4 is 20, so 4 times 4 is 16. Now I'm going to look at this and I'm going to say 15 take away 16, I can't do that. So I'm going to go back to what I know about subtracting and I'm going to borrow from my whole number. Okay? When I borrow, I have to cross this out and make it 7. And that gives me 20 pieces. So I add my denominator and numerator together to get an improper fraction so I can subtract. So the numerator is going to turn into 35. If you have questions about that, we can talk about it in class, but we've done it before. So now I'm going to go back up and I'm going to add or subtract my numerators. Okay? I'm sorry, my whole numbers. 7, don't forget, it's a new. 7 take away 1 is 6. Now I can subtract my numerators. 35 take away 16 is 19. And I keep my denominators, which is 20. Last but not least, reduce or simplify if necessary. 19/20 is in simplest form. So my answer is 6 and 19/20. I apologize for this video being so long. I'll try and make the next one shorter. Make sure you write down any questions and have your notes ready for tomorrow.